Mark it. Thank you. And frame.
王赓武's mission in life has been to chronicle the global experience of Chinese migrants. It's one he knows well, having arrived in Australia from Malaysia in 1968 to become Professor of Far Eastern History at the Australian National University. Does home have to be a country or a city? Or is home this house or that? We have been fortunate. We seemed always to have been home, he famously recounted. From his time at ANU to becoming president of the Australian Academy of the Humanities and chair of the Australia-China Council, before joining the University of Hong Kong and the National University of Singapore, Professor Wong's roles and groundbreaking research have helped shape concepts of identity and belonging, two such themes that resonate widely with many Chinese Australians. The王赓武Lecture aims to shine a light on their achievements and significant contribution to Australian life.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Skeen, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the王赓武Lecture, an initiative of the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations in partnership with the ABC. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Senator Penny Wong, and Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Tim Watts. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Tonight's event is the fourth王赓武Lecture, which is an annual celebration and acknowledgement of the substantial and long-standing contributions of Chinese Australians to Australian life. This lecture, named in honour of Professor Wong, recognises not only his distinguished career in prominent Australian institutions, but also his impactful research. His extensive body of work, including 14 books, provides a lasting legacy exploring the experience of Chinese communities around the world, which resonates deeply with our discussion today about the meaning of being Chinese Australian. Professor王赓武is represented tonight by his two daughters and their families, and thank you so much for joining us. We're here to celebrate our diverse Chinese Australian communities, and tonight's theme is the Chinese Australian community's contribution to sport, a topic close to my heart. Our keynote speaker this evening is Melissa Wu, who is Australian Olympic royalty. But before we hear about her amazing journey, I'd like to invite Wurundjeri Elder Annette Shebris to welcome us to country.
Hi, I'm Annette and I'm a Wurundjeri Elder, and I'm quite proud to be here tonight to welcome everybody onto country. And the most important part about welcomes to country is it tells people that this once was and always will be Wurundjeri country. But it's not just Wurundjeri country, it's a multicultural country. And we delight in all the many cultures that walk on our country. Like Melbourne's the only place where you don't have to go overseas to experience any cuisine you want. Italian in Lygon Street, Little Chinatown, one of the best. Greek over in Huntingdale Road, but you've got to know where to go to eat. And to have the Chinese join us as well, well, that just completes the multicultural circle, doesn't it? My children are really into Chinese culture. My daughter spent 3 months studying in China, and my son, when it comes to China and history and all the rest of it, you can't stop him, and he too wants to go and study in China, and it gives you a bit of a break for 3 months. You don't have to do their washing, ironing, cooking, and so thank you, Chinese people, for that. But I'm here to welcome you all to country, and if you're true of heart and you respect the land and you know, you want to make it a better place for all, then you're welcome on my country. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Annette, for welcoming us to country. I'd now like to invite the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, to deliver a welcome address.
Thanks very much, Patrick, and to all of our distinguished guests, to my Assistant Foreign Minister, Tim Watts, to all of my parliamentary colleagues, and there are many of you here tonight. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2025 Wangungu Lecture. Thank you, Annette, for the welcome to country. And I also want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the custodians of the lands on which we meet, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. And I offer that acknowledgement as a mark of respect for our history and as an expression of hope for our future. First Nations people were this continent's first diplomats and this continent's first traders, and I recognise their ongoing connection with the peoples of the region, and it is a connection that makes our nation stronger. I also want to acknowledge the remarkable contribution of Professor Wangungu, and I want to welcome his family here today. Named in his honour, this annual lecture celebrates Australia's diverse Chinese communities and our rich contributions to Australian society. Since I've become Foreign Minister, I have emphasised Australia's multicultural society as a source of national pride, and just as importantly, I have emphasised Australia's modern multicultural character as a source of Australian power. Half of the Australian population was born overseas or has a parent who was born overseas. Over 1 million Australians claim Chinese heritage, including me. Some can trace their ancestry through generations of Australian history, back to the gold rush. Others are more recent migrants, uprooting their lives to give their families a chance of a better one, bringing with them the culture, history and hope that defines Australia, and also the expectations and sometimes pressure that many have experienced in migrant families. I know this is something our guest Melissa Wu will speak about today. We're truly privileged to have Melissa here with us. Melissa's journey is one that has inspired Australians for 2 decades with her grace, her skill and her determination from such a young age. Making her Olympic debut as a 16-year-old at the 2008 Beijing Games, winning a silver medal and going on to claim an individual bronze 13 years later at the Tokyo Olympics. So it's our privilege to hear from her just days after announcing her retirement from this historic career. Melissa and I are both proud inheritors of Chinese ancestry from our Southeast Asian families. And I've been reflecting on my family and our traditions in recent weeks, particularly as we celebrated Lunar New Year. From being a child in Malaysia, going to temple, seeing the lion dances, to seeing Australia celebrate this month in the same way, from Box Hill to Burwood. My parents married when the White Australia policy was still in place. Look how far we have come together. Look at how we can come together to write the story of our nation. To channel Professor Wang, how we make here home for all. And remember, the values of inclusion and acceptance that underpin modern Australia must be defended. They must be nurtured by leaders and by the community. And we who have the privilege of elected office and leadership, we must never seek to divide or exclude. And you who elect us must demand this. Inclusion and acceptance and respect makes us stronger. The government in which I serve has a majority of women for the first time in Australian history. And today's Parliament is the most diverse our nation has ever had. But there is still so much more of our story to tell. So I'm so pleased that Melissa is speaking tonight. And I want to thank the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations and the ABC for once again hosting and televising the annual Wangungu Lecture. It is an essential contribution to our national story. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Wang, for your welcome address. And before I introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Melissa Wu, I'd like to share why I'm here and the journey that brought me to this podium. In 2015, I wrote a story for The Guardian Australia that shone a light on a peculiar piece of Australian history. an Australian rules football match in 1892 organised by Ballarat Police and played between local Chinese miners and market gardeners to raise funds for local causes. In what must have been incredible scenes, 5,000 people followed a loud Chinese parade to the Eastern Oval in Ballarat before they put on a display of pretty raw footy. They were laughed at and mocked, but they ploughed on, raised a lot of money and did their bit for the town. What intrigued me about this story was that it contained a counter-narrative to the rusted-on stereotypes that have marginalised and suffocated the legacy of the Chinese Australian community. That they only lived in their own clusters and had no sense of civic identity or any sense of being Australian. My journey began, which culminated in a book, Celestial Footy, The Story of Chinese Heritage Aussie Rules. The book was the end product of great support from the AFL and the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations. Why me? Well, one benefit of the curious outside storyteller is they see extraordinary in what the community thinks is the ordinary. And through research and luck, I uncovered a 140-year hidden tradition, a new chapter for the often historically invisible Chinese Australians. Celestial Footy was written in response to the increase in abuse that Chinese Australians received over COVID-19, which resulted in a decreased sense of belonging, according to a Lowy Institute survey. I didn't think that treatment was fair, considering the incredible nation-building contribution of Chinese Australians, who are in every way a foundation partner of Australia. So inspired by the Chinese proverb, the faintest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory, I set off on a journey that took me across 50 towns and cities across Australia. In dusty museums, I fought through hay fever, ruined my favourite shoes tiptoeing through muddy graveyards, and gathered leads from chatty librarians. While some men think of the Roman Empire 3 times a day, for 2 years all I thought about was Chinese Aussie rules players. And slowly an incredible story took shape, richly peopled by intriguing characters, dating back to the pioneer Chin Kit, who first ran onto the field in Bendigo in 1882. In amongst the dark truths of the Chinese Australian history of adversity, racism and exclusion were also tales of mateship, of triumph and tragedy, standing by your mates when they're in a fight, having a go, copping it sweet. All of those quintessential Aussie values were in full bloom. Sport working its magic in revealing our common humanity. When I would tell friends about my project documenting Chinese Australian footy stories, their retort was, that'll be a short brochure. They got the shock of their life when they read this book. Far from a fleeting phenomenon, my research documented more than 300 footy players across the nation at a time when there was little or no Chinese participation in other sports. In their quest for belonging and an Australian identity, footy gave them a shared sense of mission and bound them into the local community, serving as a portal from the outside to the inside. The Chinese footy story is one of perseverance, but also one of excellence. North Melbourne's Les Q Ming, who in 1928 won the Sporting Globe competition for the longest kicker in the land. The great Les Fong from Perth, also known as Captain Courageous. Lin Zhong, the resilient and tough Western Bulldogs legend. Darcy Vecchio, the first AFLW player to reach 50 goals. Sophie Lee, emergency paramedic by night, Crows premiership winner by day. And of course, the Brisbane Lions' Calamar Chi, who was voted the best player of the 2024 AFL Finals. I vividly recall seeking shade in a deserted, sweltering Derby street in far northwest Australia, thinking what could possibly have driven Cantonese migrant Owen Chi to settle there in 1885 as the town baker, watch fixer and resident builder. And how proud he would have been of his great-grandson, Callum, playing the great Australian game and leading the Brisbane Lions to the promised land. The story of Wally Koo Chu, the pioneer VFL player who made his debut for Carlton in 1908, his selection triggering a Carlton member to resign, stating that Wally's selection was a death blow to the White Australia policy. Right here in Melbourne, from the 1930s to the 1980s, the young Chinese League team played half a century of great footy, hundreds of games in Albert Park featuring post-match feasts at the Temple, and travelling the state playing country teams like roving Chinese Aussie diplomats. Hungry for meaning, purpose and identity, hundreds of Chinese Australians found what they were looking for through footy. At the end of my journey, I was exhausted but enlightened. Through celestial footy, I'd learnt firsthand of the incredible contribution of a people often airbrushed out of the national story, the phantom limb of Australian history. And my conclusion was, we are not a complete nation until we are the sum of all of our people's stories. Beyond the sanitised frontier myths and jarring stories of exclusion and erasure, I also found many positives. I learnt the stories of diverse communities trying to get along, working together through tough times, celebrating, marrying each other and playing footy together. And from playing one sport, the Chinese Australian community have now spread out to play many, including Olympic excellence in table tennis, badminton and diving. Which brings me to our keynote speaker tonight, Melissa Wu. In a career spanning 5 Olympics, Melissa has personified diving excellence in both the 10-metre platform and 10-metre synchronised platform events. And she stands alone as both Australia's youngest ever Olympic diver and the only Australian diver to go to 5 Olympics. She is a 3 times Commonwealth gold medalist and won a silver medal in the 2008 Beijing Olympics and followed that feat 12 years later with a bronze at the 2020 Games in Tokyo. In the 2022 Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, she was selected to be the Australian flag carrier at the closing ceremony. She is very proud of her Chinese heritage by way of her father, and to share with us her Chinese-Australian journey, please give a warm welcome to Melissa Wu.
Thank you, Patrick, for such a wonderful introduction. Thanks also, Auntie Annette, for welcoming us all to country. I've spent a lot of time training and competing in Melbourne over the years, and I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri as the traditional custodians of these lands that we live on and the waterways that we swim in. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Wanggung Wu and his family. I'd also like to acknowledge the Foreign Minister, Senator, the Honourable Penny Wong, and the Assistant Foreign Minister, the Honourable Tim Watts. Today I'd like to talk about the journey that took a 16-year-old girl from Richmond, Sydney, to the Beijing Olympics. It's a story I've told before, but in the past, I've always spoken about my career through topics like mindset, resilience, determination, and mental health. However, a subject I've rarely touched on is that of my childhood, my family, and my Chinese heritage. These have arguably played the most significant role in shaping who I am today. Today, I'd like to share how the positive influences I experienced in the early stages of my life helped me achieve both early success and longevity in the sport of diving and beyond. My grandparents and my dad migrated to Australia in the 1970s from Burma. They moved to the small suburb of Richmond in Greater Western Sydney, where they lived in the same house for over 50 years. Richmond is 65 kilometres from the city and feels like a small country town. Growing up, my family were the only Asians in town, apart from the family who owned the local Chinese restaurant. My grandfather was a doctor with his own medical practice in Richmond. People always referred to him fondly as Dr. Wu, possibly because it was easier to say than his first name, Kong Yin. Growing up, I was always very close with my grandparents and spent a lot of time with them at their house. My father is of Chinese heritage, but my mother's family had been in Australia for several generations. My mum has always embraced the Chinese culture and the family values that my grandparents and our family share. Interestingly, of my parents, it's always been my mum who has been a big driving force in us celebrating and maintaining our Chinese family values, and who has helped me feel connected to my Chinese heritage. She spent a lot of time with my dad's family, and my grandma helped a lot with raising my 4 siblings and I. At our family get-togethers, conversations would be part English, part Burmese, part Mandarin, and part Cantonese. My grandparents were the only ones who spoke all of those languages. This mix of languages around our table was a reflection of the cultural diversity within my family. And despite the fact that not everyone could understand what was being said 100% of the time, the beauty was in everyone simply coming together. And there was no doubt we all had a lot of love for each other. Once, I asked my grandma to teach me some Mandarin. She agreed and proceeded to point to about 25 items around the kitchen in quick succession and then asked me to repeat them back to her. I remember just staring at her blankly. Needless to say, I didn't master Mandarin. This was just one of many treasured memories I have of spending hours with my grandma as a child. My diving career also started at my grandparents' house. I used to climb onto the top of their back shed, which must have been 3 metres high, and my grandma would shout at me to climb down. I would tell her I didn't know how, so I'd just have to jump. I gave her a heart attack every time. As kids, our parents encouraged us to do a variety of sports. My sister was a competitive swimmer, but I preferred the rush of adrenaline from jumping off high objects. I convinced my parents to let me start diving when I imagined what a rush it would be to jump from a platform that was 10 metres high. They took me to my first session in Parramatta, and I ended up falling in love. Little did I know at that point the amount of strength, power, and physical resilience required for diving, or that the sport would completely change my life. When I was 8, the Olympics were held in Sydney. My grandpa had gotten tickets to the closing ceremony. Of all of the members of our family, including my siblings, cousins, second cousins, aunts, and my own grandma, he chose me to go with him. To this day, I'm still not sure why my grandpa chose me, especially because at that time I had such little sporting talent, especially compared to my older sister, who was by then a national level swimmer. After that, it was as if a switch inside me had flipped, and all of a sudden I had a burning desire to become an Olympian. When I was 12, I was given the opportunity of a lifetime to join the junior squad in the Australian Institute of Sport diving program in Brisbane. It was the chance to train alongside Australia's diving Olympians and Olympic medalists. It's also when I started diving under my coach, Xiangning Chen. Xiangning was from China and had moved to Australia to help train the next generation of Australian divers. At that time, his English was quite limited. Although I can't understand or speak Cantonese or Mandarin, we both spoke diving, and we made a great team. Xiangning had a massive influence on me as a junior athlete. We worked incredibly well together because he knew how to challenge me and push me to my limits. Even though training was extremely tough, he was also very encouraging and empathetic. Between training sessions, he would always ask, "How's school? Make sure you're studying." And one of the reasons we worked so well together was because I understood what he expected of me: to be diligent, driven, and resilient. These were the very same values I'd grown up with, thanks to my grandparents and parents. Values that are not only important, but had been ingrained into me at a cultural level. During that time, one of my favourite things that Xiangning would say to me after a dive was very standard. This was his way of saying that my dive had been good or had reached the minimum standard for Chinese divers. I used to get very excited hearing him say very standard, especially because he would say it enthusiastically with a thumbs up. Very standard. While this encouragement didn't seem to work as well for the other kids, perhaps because I had some ability to understand Xiangning on a cultural level, that was the equivalent of a gold star for me and always gave me a huge confidence boost. Another valuable part of Xiangning's training technique was to show us footage of other world-class divers. Back in the days before YouTube, he had to burn the footage of these competitions onto a DVD. China has been the best in the world at diving throughout my entire career. It was during these sessions that I first saw girls that were my age from China competing on the world stage and winning gold medals. Seeing this was massive for me because it was the first time that I realised athletes as young as 13 could compete at such a high level. Not only compete, but dominate. While watching these competitions, Xiangning would talk about what made these girls so good. Life wasn't easy for young athletes in China. Many of them are required to move away from home around the age of 8 to live and train in state training centres. For these athletes, becoming an Olympic diver wasn't just a childhood dream or hobby. It was the opportunity to make a better life for themselves and their families. They would train up to 3 times a day, rarely see their families, and it was fiercely competitive because everybody wanted to make it. Hearing this, I immediately associated it with my grandparents' experience of migrating to Australia for a better life and for better opportunities for themselves and their family. And for me, it resembled the way they had worked hard for everything that they achieved in their lives. Being able to understand the work ethic and mental fortitude of these Chinese athletes from this cultural level made me realise that I'd grown up with similar values, which helped me believe that I too could be like them and compete for Australia at the highest level. During tough training days, I thought of what my grandparents endured in coming to Australia and their dedication to making a better life for the family. I would describe my training at that age 12, as incredibly gruelling. It involved thousands of repetitions every day, and not just in the pool, but in dryland sessions where we would practice somersaults on trampolines, onto crash mats, and into foam pits. We'd also do 3-hour sessions dedicated to strength training alone, which involved running, jumping and sprinting until you couldn't feel your legs, doing so much core work that you couldn't sit up in bed the next morning, and doing upper body exercises like handstands until you collapsed onto your head. Beyond the physical training, there was also a huge mental aspect to diving. Learning new dives for the first time or performing dives that you're afraid of was incredibly scary. It's a sort of fear that would keep me up at night, knowing that if the dive didn't go to plan, I would be splatting on the water at 60 kilometres an hour from the 10-metre platform. During those times, I always had my goal of becoming an Olympian in the forefront of my mind, and I knew that if my coach Xiangning believed in me, that I could do it. During my childhood training in Brisbane, I saw a lot of athletes come and go from all over Australia. Your position in the national squad was never completely safe, and if you weren't performing, you were cut from the program. This environment created high-level diving athletes, but was also incredibly stressful. Had my coach Xiangning not taught me about the divers from China who experienced not just similar, but more challenging and competitive circumstances, I think I would have struggled a lot more to push through and achieve my goals at that age. Being able to relate to these divers from a cultural level, combined with my drive to make my family proud, is something I've always considered as one of the most significant influences on my career, and I've always thought of it as my secret weapon. Thanks to training with Xiangning, I won a silver medal at my first Commonwealth Games at the age of 13. I was the youngest ever Australian diver to compete for Australia. After that, I set my sights on the Beijing 2008 Olympics. As someone who has competed at 5 Olympics, a common question I'm asked is which Olympic Games is my favourite. For me, the answer will never change. Without a doubt, my first Olympics will forever be my favourite and will always hold a special place in my heart. Not only was there that cultural connection, but my grandpa came to Beijing to watch me compete. Him coming to watch was his way of showing that he was proud of me. As a 16-year-old, I was incredibly nervous at that Olympics. I had expectations from Diving Australia and the Australian media to win a medal. Plus, I didn't want to let my coach Xiangning down or my family, especially when my grandpa, as well as my dad and my sister, had come all the way to see me. As the competition inched closer, I felt extremely nervous. I was young. I wasn't particularly well equipped to cope with the pressure, especially at Olympic level, the pinnacle of sporting competitions. For those who don't know a lot about diving or who haven't seen much before, we spend countless hours doing repetition after repetition to prepare for a moment in competition that is over in less than a second. With each Olympic cycle, you train 4 years in order to complete 5 dives that are over in the blink of an eye. Diving requires technique, skill, and precision, but it also takes an equal amount of mental fortitude, self-belief, and the ability to perform under pressure. Performing under pressure was never something that I was good at. In synchro competitions, you do 5 dives. The first 2 are easy dives, and the last 3 are hard dives. My synchro partner Bree and I had been doing well in the synchro competition. Our third dive was a front 3.5 pike. Our fourth dive was an inward 3.5 somersault tuck. And then there was the fifth and final dive. We went in knowing China would be impossible to beat, but that we'd have a shot at a medal. I still remember how it felt walking up the stairs to the platform, knowing that this would be the biggest make or break moment of my life. Even though I'd trained my whole childhood for that moment, the pressure in that situation made me wish that I was anywhere else in the world but there. It was so quiet, I could almost hear the sound of my heart beating, and I could feel it pounding against my chest. My legs were jelly, and it felt like they were about to give way underneath me at any moment. And even though the pool area was cold, my palms were sweating. The announcer called our names, and all of a sudden, we were walking towards the end of the platform. Even though we were from a foreign country, I do think that the Chinese spectators had semi-embraced me given my Chinese heritage, and I could hear them shouting, "Jiao!" Our final dive was a back 2.5 somersault with 1.5 twists in the pike position. So we walked to the end of the board, turned around, and stood on the end on just our toes. In that final moment before our dive, I no longer felt the strong thud of my heartbeat. Instead, it felt as if my heart had completely stopped. The crowd was silent, and I could hear the sound of my breath as I tried to slow it down and maintain control over my body. Synchro divers have a joke we say to each other before events. Remember, just go at the same time. As soon as we took off, I knew we were perfectly in sync, and the dive flowed naturally as it should. We twisted through the air and pulled ourselves into a pike position like a mirror image of each other. In diving, as soon as you hit the water, you know whether it's been a good or a bad dive. Even so, during that moment underwater, I was anxious about what the scoreboard would show. When my head popped up out of the water, I looked to the scoreboard and felt a huge wave of relief. We'd won silver. In that moment, I could finally say in my own mind that I'd made it. Not only had I produced a result that I knew would make my coach Shangning proud, it was also my way of showing my family, and particularly my grandparents, that I'd been able to work hard for something and achieve it. In doing so, I'd made my family proud, and winning Olympic silver with them watching in the crowd was one of the best moments of my life, and one that I'll cherish forever. Since the Beijing 2008 Olympics, I've dived at 4 more Olympic Games. I'm the first Australian Olympic diver to compete at 5 Olympics, and I've had an international career spanning 18 years, which is a very, very long time throwing yourself headfirst off a 10-metre platform. While I was successful in winning an Olympic medal at my first Olympics, it took me what felt like an eternity of 12 years to win another one. I had a disappointing 4th and 5th place finish at the London 2012 and Rio 2016 Olympics, and I knew that Tokyo 2020 would quite possibly be my last chance ever. Throughout those 12 years, I kept chipping away, pouring every part of myself into achieving my dream of winning another Olympic medal. Throughout my career, I've encountered numerous challenges that I wasn't sure I could overcome, including injuries, disappointing results, ongoing competition anxiety, and family tragedy. I lost my younger sister Kirsten in 2014 and my grandma in 2021, 6 months before the Tokyo Olympics. Coping with their loss taught me to never take a single day for granted, and in doing so, gave me the strength to put in the work required to make the changes I had to make in order to achieve my dream. At the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, I was finally able to win a bronze medal. Even though Kirsten and my grandma were no longer with us, I felt like they were lending me their strength when I was up on the platform. Winning another Olympic medal 12 years after my first signified not only my growth as an athlete, but as a person. Whenever I face a challenge, no matter how insurmountable it may seem, I think of them. I remind myself of my goals and then approach it with the same grit and determination I always have to make my family proud. Everything that I learned as a child and during my career as an athlete did not disappear when I stepped off the platform. Instead, it became the foundation for my next chapter, building my career beyond sport. I own a strength and conditioning gym and weightlifting club in Kings Park in Sydney with my brother Joshua and sister Madeline. All the advice I heard before starting the gym was don't go into business with your family. But I wouldn't choose anyone else to go into business with. And together we ride the ups and downs, just as we've done our entire lives. If there's one thing that our Chinese heritage taught us from a young age, it's the strength and loyalty of family. And that is the foundation of our business. Our gym is more than just a place to train. It's a community. We coach the next generation of Aussie athletes, swimmers, divers, rugby players, and weightlifters. And in many ways, they've become part of our extended family. Just as in my childhood home, connection and understanding far outweigh any differences. We may come from different backgrounds and speak different languages, but the respect and support we have for one another make it a place where everyone belongs. It's a place where we share the common language of dedication, resilience, and support. And these same values are what I've carried with me onto the world stage. At my 5th Commonwealth Games in Birmingham 2022, I had the incredible honour of being the Australian flag bearer at the closing ceremony. It was a moment that filled me with a huge sense of pride. I was not only making Australian diving history, I was representing Australia, my family, and the values that they instilled in me in front of the whole world. While life after sport can be challenging, it's incredibly rewarding for me to give back to the next generation of athletes and impart the knowledge and experience that I've gained throughout my career to help them reach their potential. From climbing my grandparents' shed as a fearless child to standing on an Olympic podium, every step of my journey has been guided by the values of my family and by my Chinese heritage. I will always be proud of my Chinese heritage, and I intend on passing on our family traditions to future Wu generations and instilling in all of the athletes I coach the values that my grandparents and entire family taught me, ensuring that they live on in future generations. It has been a huge honour to represent the Chinese Australian community and to give this lecture tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and wow, that was wonderful. It was fascinating to hear your pioneering story, and I can only imagine how many young girls of Asian Australian background would have been inspired and felt represented every time you leapt off that 10-metre board. In a time of increased polarisation, fragmentation and disconnection, stories have an elevated medicinal role in binding us together, and hearing your story tonight made my heart sing. Thank you. A pitch-perfect emotional story built on respect, gratitude, resilience, the love of a supportive family, and striving for excellence. You are indeed a unique pioneer. Your story encapsulates both pride in dual identity and the spectacular contribution of Chinese Australians who have given great service for the nation. From the first hard-working shepherds, brush cutters, cooks, miners, market gardeners, laundrymen, general store owners, to a thriving community today. They sit alongside the swaggy, the stockman and the bushranger in our national narrative, and their stories deserve to be remembered and not overlooked and marginalised and lost in the folds of history. And tonight, we've put a deserved spotlight on the amazing career of Melissa Wu, who recently retired from competitive diving in a blaze of glory after a 22-year career. From that 16-year-old girl who was the youngest ever Aussie Olympic diver to travelling to 5 Olympics across the world, yours is an important story in Australian sporting and cultural history, and we're very lucky to have you. On behalf of the National Foundation for Australia-China Relations and the ABC, I'd like to thank Minister Penny Wong for the welcome address, Auntie Annette Shibris for the welcome to country, and thank you, Melissa, for delivering a profoundly beautiful Wang Gungwu lecture. Have a great evening, and thank you very much.